Trash, a podcast diving into the trash world of education. My name is Sabrina Alicia, and I am a lifelong educator. Today, I am joined by Tony DelaRosa, author of Teaching the Invisible Race and Ph.D. student at UW-Madison. Tony, how are you feeling today?
Oh, I'm feeling good. It is Sunday. It is my rest day. I just had pancakes with my son and my wife. I'm happy. So I'm full and fed. So thank you
Good.
for having me.
That's beautiful. I'm happy that you're here today. We like to start off the show with a little SCL check-in. So today we'll do peaks and valleys. I personally like to start with my valleys because I want to start with the bad stuff and then go into the peak. But you can choose whichever. So you go first. Peak and a valley.
Oh, Valley. Let's do Valley. Yeah, I'll do Valley first. Valley. I feel a little disconnected right now. So I'm in Madison. I just moved from Miami to Madison. It's been a month. So it is very different. As you know, Miami is a melting pot, a big immigrant community narrative. And then I'm moving back to the Midwest, which is beautiful, right? For my PhD. But I feel disconnected, like a lack of community. Whereas in Miami, I got my go-to people. I know what cafeteria to go to, to get my coquetas and my cafecito, but here it's a little bit, I'm living in the burbs. So wow. I'm like, I like that where the burbs meet rural and farmland. So I'm like, I'm not near this. I'm a little bit near the city, but I like to be able to walk out and then go to the, go to the spot, so I'm feeling a little lonely out here, but my peak is, it's been really nice to meet incoming folks. It's a new neighborhood. And what I'm seeing is that it's hella diverse out here. I'm seeing like a South Asian community, like a person moving in here. I saw a Puerto Rican and another South Asian family moving in, like mixed race family. I'm seeing all over the place, a lot of identities, specifically from the Asian American community moving in our neighborhood. So I was like, okay, I'm feeling a little more at home. This is cool.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, you and I both have this in common that we've like bounced around a lot as kids and even as adults. So like it's always this transition of like when you're in a new space trying to find your community and find your people. So yeah, I hope that goes smoothly for you. I'm glad you're finding some other fellow AAPI folks with you. So for me, my valley is recently I've been having I was noting that there's been a lot of tough conversations I've had to have. I have this nonprofit Somos Arte, and then I have my job where I'm like a director, and just like in life in general, someone even randomly got into an argument with me on Instagram and then was like, I'll unfollow if it's a big deal. And I was like, please feel free to unfollow. So just these very tough conversations that are happening a lot. And I am like a non-confrontational person. I'm strong. I have boundaries, but I'm non-confrontational. So I was like, ugh, and it just makes me really uncomfortable. But my peak is that there's been so many more great conversations that are happening, like things that are really, really healthy, and leading to some really beautiful things. So like my org started our summer program, and I had talked about it a bit on the podcast that we were having issues with the insurance and like trying to pay for it. Someone stepped up and offered to fund the insurance. So we actually have insurance funded for an entire year, which is really dope. It's huge. But that ended up pushing back other funds. And so we didn't get money for supplies yet. The class already started, so we have to wait for that to come by the end of this week. But then in that interim, someone was like, hey, what can I provide for you? And, people were giving money to help make sure that we had at least notebooks and pencils and erasers for the kids. And then yesterday I went to a dinner with Soraya. You remember Soraya?
Oh yeah, from San Diego. Yeah, she's a sis.
Yeah. So I went to dinner with her. She's in town. She actually used to live in Chicago for a while, teaching out here. So she has tons of friends out here. And one time she was out and I was like, girl, make some time for me next time you're in town. So she did. And the person we went to dinner with, a friend of hers, works with this organization that has like grants for food, and we were just talking about all of this, the stuff with my programming, and she was like, "Oh, we can get the food for the kids. Like, we can feed your kids for the last 4 weeks. We're there for 4 hours and they don't have any food, and we can't use our budget for that." I was just like, "Are you kidding me?" It
That's what's
felt very
up.
like, yeah, it felt
Oh,
very like serendipity. I don't know. So
100%.
lots of big
Yeah.
convos like that, and then we're doing our backpack drive, and the meetings have been going wonderful for that. So there's just like
Oh, good
magic in places
energy.
when, yeah, good energy for sure. So that's been my peak in my
And tell
valley.
me a little bit about. I know this is more focused on me, but I want to know more about the nonprofit you just started because this is new to me. Are you bringing art to schools? Are you bringing like programming to schools? Tell me a little.
Yeah, it would be beautiful if we eventually did it. It's so funny you mentioned this too, because I'm like, I talk about things on my podcast, but because I'm not the person being interviewed, sometimes I'm like, do people know what I'm talking about? So thank you for asking. But it's
Yes.
the organization is called Somos Arte, and it was founded out of the Puerto Rican Festival when I started back in 2019. So we no longer do the festival, but
Okay.
we transitioned from that. I was like trying to raise money for the festival, trying to bring together artists.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had noticed that for years, whenever the festival was happening, there was no art, and I had wanted to bring in some artists. So I connected to like three that first year, and then the next year was like the pandemic, but then we brought in way more artists the following year. We've done mural projects in the city. We did one at Wright
Mm.
College, a community college. We have a big mural project going on with U of I that's going to be happening pretty soon. So we're
Oh,
more
amazing.
partnering with like education centers. Yeah. And then the ASM class is this program in Chicago. They have programming for high school teens, and they fund different programs throughout the city all over. And it's like things that if you went to the suburbs, most of those families would pay for. So like piano lessons, cooking
Mm-hmm.
classes, dance classes. And so ours is an art class. Nico, my boyfriend, is the one who's teaching it, but he's an
Yeah.
artist, and so he's teaching them how to do like spray painting, muraling,
Oh,
making
dope.
toys. Last week we worked on color theory. We actually took his character, because he has a character in the city. We took it and like drew what it looked like. We talked about the color theory behind, like that it's a positive character, it's happy, and then we did an alternative version of it. The kids named it Raymond, and they said that he yells at his mom. That's his like thing.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
that's
he
dark.
and he had
Okay.
like darker clothes, he had like sinister eye,
Mm.
so it was like cool to do these little things with the kids, and they're all wanting to explore art and street art. So it's like taking that bridge of the artists that we work with on these big projects, and then bringing that
Yeah.
knowledge and impact and opportunity to the kids. That's what we got.
See, I just wanted to learn a little bit because, I used to run a nonprofit for youth. I know this is not the podcast to talk about it this round or maybe next time, but it was for you spoken word, right? So when you talk about getting your insurance policy, that was such a challenge for me because it prevented me from getting money in my pocket from my
Yes.
teachers. So I understand 100% the beauty, the complexity, the pains of
Yes.
doing what you're doing with artwork too, which can be like you're always negotiating value, right? Which is like,
Yes.
this is valuable, so you need to pay a little extra for this because it's
Yes.
not just a normal program? So I
Yeah.
get you.
Oh man, I appreciate you saying that, because I was saying how I don't know anybody like I don't want to say the word established, but like my family is full of hard workers and people who followed certain career paths, not founders. And I don't know anybody else who had to experience the things that I'm experiencing. So like I come across a roadblock and I'm like, what the heck? Like, and I have a pretty broad network, but I still am
Hmm.
coming with so many things that I just like don't have answers or experience to, and
Right.
that's part of the tough conversations, because I'm like needing to problem solve things that I don't know how to problem solve, and
Uh-huh.
that's where the
Uh-huh.
difficulty lies.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I think we have to talk about is how we met each other, because it is one of the
Mm-hmm.
craziest, wildest stories. And when I posted it on my Instagram, there were so many people from Harvard who were like, wait, I didn't know this about you and Tony. And I'm like, yeah. So we found out at Harvard that you and I actually went to third grade together.
Yeah.
Crazy. Tell me what that was like from your experience and your lens when you remember figuring it out.
It's just so funny. I just remember, and the pictures you posted, which is hilarious, is this smug photo of me because I'm not a smug. I don't that's not my go-to face. Like if
Not
you
at
know
all.
me, I'm such a joyous, like happy-go-lucky face unless shit hits the fan with,
Yep.
oppression and whatnot, right? If you're messing with
Mm-hmm.
my family and if people are being oppressed. So but that was the smuggest ass face I've ever seen from my body. And I was like, wait, I've seen that face recently. Oh, I've seen it
Mm.
in my son.
Oh my
Right? So
God.
I'm like, that's where his face comes from that lineage of, and
Neat.
that face comes from my grandmother, who like
Mm.
passed away a while back. Her name's Apung Dena, Grandma Dena. And she had this like smug ass face everyone was scared of. So let me just talk about that image, and then in relation to you and us, what do I remember about you? I remember for some reason, I just remember you were just bouncing everywhere. Like you were just energetic, talking to everybody. I don't know, you maybe had multiple boyfriends at the time. I don't know, but you
Yes.
had flowers in your hand. I remember these weird images. Like, I remember these weird images of you because I kind of kept to myself
Mhm. You were
at school.
quiet.
I was
Yeah.
quiet. I was quiet. I was
Yeah.
like in the shadow of my sister because my sister was a year above me. So I kind
Mm.
of just like saw the world through her and
Mm-hmm.
then did my own nerdy stuff. Like I played video games, watch anime. That's it. That was my
Yeah.
life, not what I
Yeah.
am now. So I just was observant.
Mm.
And in third grade, I thought it was fourth grade, by the way, with Mr. Cyber. But third grade, I was like, whoa, Mr. Taylor, like the
Yeah.
rotations that we had. So I'm like remembering the rotations.
Yeah. We switched classes
Um,
in third grade. That was like unheard of back then.
right, right. I'm
Yeah.
like, we're switching classes. We have specialized teachers.
Yeah.
And what I do remember from class in general was probably the first time I've ever used chopsticks randomly.
Mm. Did I
So
do
I
something
did learn.
problematic?
No, 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 no. I definitely like every time I talk to anyone about like when I go to any type of Asian restaurant when I'm eating Asian food with chopsticks, I was like, I learned it from third grade. I can always
Mm.
pinpoint that because I was like,
Yeah.
they did teach us some cultural things in that class. I don't know if you I
Yeah.
don't. It seems like you don't remember that, but I remember it
I
from that
don't remember
class.
much at all. I remember small tidbits. Like I remember what the school looked like because for me it was
Yeah.
so crazy. Like, well, first of all, the context is we were on the military base in California.
Yeah.
And so this was a school on the military base and we were in third grade, but we also were in fourth grade together. I just don't have that picture.
Yeah.
Because I was in Mr. Sieber's class too, and then I transferred to Stuart Mesa, so I only did third and fourth grade at Mary Fay.
Oh.
Yeah, so it was on the military base, and the crazy thing is because it was military, because people are such revolving doors, kids were coming in and
Hmm.
out. There was a high turnover, which I think is also why the switching worked for them. Because a school that I taught at many years down the line also had we did rotations like that too, and it allows you to become an expert in your field as
Yeah.
opposed to like trying to learn everything and handle it all. But I digress on that. But I remember switching the classes, and also the fact that it was military also led to it being such a diverse population of students. I had never experienced, like where I was from in Chicago,
Hmm.
it was very Latino. And then the white people that we had, they weren't even like quote unquote what you see as white Americans. They were mostly Polish. So they were very
Oh
connected to
wow.
their Polish culture. Yeah, there's like some myth or theory that like Chicago has the second most Polish people outside of Warsaw, whatever. Like it's like the
Whoa.
population is that, yeah, it's a very high Polish population. And so being in Mary Fay was just like you could look at that picture and that looks like the United Nations. Like there's so many different kids from there.
That's the first thing I looked at. I looked at it. I was like looking at the makeup of the people's faces, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh my god, that's Michael from Japan. Oh, that's Zach. He's Puerto Rican Filipino." I'm like, "What? Like
And
what?
you
We
knowing
did,
all of
we
that,
did,
yeah.
we did grow up in a very diverse, like very revolving door community. So it was hard to hold
Yes.
best friends,
Right.
but it's just something to say about that we remembered each other from
Yeah.
such a long ass time ago and up
Yeah.
till now. Because when we met at Hugsy, I was like, what do I remember about that person's face?
Yeah,
How did we
I remember
meet?
that situation was crazy. So what happened was, so I'm gonna be honest, I didn't even remember until I saw the old picture, and then I was like, I remember this this face. I remember this kid. There was like a day that I walked into something. It was like at student of color orientation or something. I remember you were like
Yeah.
eating and everybody sitting at a table, and it's like that first day you're like, what table do I go and sit at? And then I
Yeah.
heard you say something about when you lived in Oceanside, and that's why I sat down at that table because I was like, I used to live in
Oh.
Oceanside. And then you were like, I knew it because you said at the like first student of color thing, my face looked familiar to you, but you couldn't place it.
Yeah.
And then when I said
Oh.
Oceanside, you were like, wait a minute. And that's how we were. So what, we were 8 when we first met each other. And then we were 28. So
20,
like, right? Well, how?
20 years later. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Just right around that
Crazy.
time. Yeah. Oh my
So,
lord.
so wild. I'm
Small
like,
world.
that
Small world.
felt small, super, super, super small world. That felt really cool. And yeah, like you said, there was no social media back then. Like I had friends that I kind of kept in touch with like through letter writing. But I know nobody from back then anymore. Like I
There's like a Mayor Faye Facebook group somewhere.
invite
Like I
me.
followed it. I'll invite you to it. Like I remember someone's still running it too. Like I'll check it just for memories, you know. But I don't know anyone on that, so I'll invite you
That's
to
true.
it after this.
Yeah, I wanna reconnect. So that's crazy. But then obviously we went to Harvard together, had some great times. We'll talk about what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But first, I told you I wanted to get into a little bit of gameplay and make this a little fun. You
Oh,
ready for a
okay.
game? You ready for a game?
I don't want to be
Okay.
quiz though.
No, it's not a
Okay.
quiz. It's not a
Okay,
quiz.
okay,
And
okay.
and there's no right or wrong answer
Cool, cool,
in
cool.
general, but like in
Okay,
terms of
got you.
social norms, there's going to be a right or wrong answer. So be careful,
Okay, okay.
okay?
Okay, be
So,
careful. Got you.
the
Got you.
game is called, and this is like based on, the conversation we would have at Harvard and then also the work that you've done in the past. So the game is called
Got you.
problematic or poetic. So I'm going to give you,
Oh, dang. Okay.
it's good, right? I'm going to
Yeah,
give
that's good. That's
you
good.
a term, a concept, an idea, whatever, and you're going to tell me whether or not it's problematic or poetic. And you can explain why, okay? I'll give you an easy one to start off. You ready?
Okay.
Coalition building.
Poetic.
Poetic,
And
yeah. See, that's an
poetic.
easy
So
one.
I can just that's an easy that is an easy one. Coalition building because not enough people do it, and if people are doing it, they don't make themselves known as much. So I love how poetic that is.
Okay, I love that. Potlucks where everyone knows how to cook.
Oh, that's problematic. um,
Problematic?
yeah, where everyone knows how to cook.
Yeah, it's gonna be all
Cook
good
what?
food.
Okay, okay, okay. If it's
Yeah.
gonna be good food, then it's poetic. Cause
Yes.
I like when people are bringing the food and then conversations and
Yes.
it feels very familial. So okay,
Yes.
we'll do that. We'll do poetic there.
Yeah, because I had to do the caveat that everyone knows how to cook. If people don't know how to cook, I don't want your.
Ah,
I'm not even gonna say what item I don't like because it
what
could be
you
seen.
bring?
It could be
Yes,
it could be misinterpreted. But everyone knows how to
right.
cook. Okay, intentional DEI work.
Intentional DEI work. I mean, if it's really intentional, if it's real work that moves and changes systems, ideologies, then it's poetic. It's hella poetic. If it's not intentional, then it's problematic.
That is
Let's leave it at
problematic.
that.
See the game's not. It's not bad. It's not a hard
It's
game.
not bad. It's
Okay,
not bad.
here's the next one. The Supreme Court minus Sonia Sotomayor.
Oh Lord, the Supreme Court minus
Yes.
Sonia Sotomayor. Hella problematic. I mean, we just have Katani, the new Supreme Court justice joined, so
Yes.
it,
That's
it would
poetic.
it would still be problematic because we would need Sonia Sotomayor. Why would she be out? So
Right. Well, I'm protecting her.
protect
All
her.
right. At all costs. New England clam chowder. Problematic or poetic?
Oh Lord, I've never had the New England clam chowder. I've had clam chowder, so I'm just gonna say
What? You never had New England clam chowder?
not New England clam chowder. When we were there, it just wasn't a thing that I was into. I felt so white to me. I was like, okay, I don't know. So maybe I'm being problematic in that sense right now. So I'll call myself out. So I'm problematic
Wow.
there.
Honestly, when we were living, because I lived at Cronkite, and when we were living there, Fiona used to make fun of me because every meal they always offer a soup. And one time she was
Yeah.
like, Sabrina, you're just such a soup girl. You always got to eat the soup. Didn't matter what the weather was like outside.
Oh my God.
That clam chowder at Cronkite
Bomb.
was the best clam chowder I've
Oh
had in my
what?
life. It was so good. It was so
Okay. A
good. Yeah, so
Cronkite.
at Cronkite. It was
Okay.
poetic to me. I tried to go out to the nice restaurants, eat the clam chowder.
Oh
Crap, I
Lord.
wanted my Cronkite. And it might have been
Oh,
like chunky
hilarious.
that they just like chunky soup that they poured in a bowl. Who
Probably
knows?
did.
It probably was, but I liked it. Okay, all right. This one is a homage and toss up to you. Stay at home dads.
I think it could be very poetic, okay, friends?
Yes.
Because technically, right now, in my moment, I'm a stay-at-home dad, and if you're
Yes.
if you're in a heteronormative relationship, as I am in right now, and in this case scenario, the woman is doing, is wearing the pants, quote unquote, then it can be very poetic that you stay at home, you clean, you take on that quote unquote traditionally feminist labor that you would do, right?
Yep.
I am learning. I think it's helpful because my father did that mostly because my
Okay.
mom brings the money, and my father like is more of the person who like makes the fun money, the
Yeah.
party money. You know what I mean? He doesn't make the
I
real
like that.
income. So
Yeah, my dad actually for a while he did something similar to what you're doing because I'm like you're not I don't want to label you but like you quote unquote stay at home but you also are going to be in school, you're writing a book, like it's not like you don't have things that you're doing. And my
yeah,
dad was very similar. My mom, they took turns like on who was going to go to school and advance their career. So while
right.
he was in school, he didn't work outside of that. And he did so much in the house. Like we make fun of how he fed us. This man would literally cook chicken breast full and put a slice of cheese on top of it and then bread that wasn't toasted on the outside. It was the soggiest, weirdest sandwich I've ever had in my life. But we ate. We ate. So he,
Now,
yeah, he did that for a while, and then he got better. He started like getting
yeah,
recipes, and there's a
yeah.
famous one he has that's from Men's Health, and it was a mahi mahi meal, and sometimes he still cooks it. It's
Oh,
very
okay,
good.
fancy.
It
Okay.
was super super good. So yeah, but I think stay at home dads, especially when it's to advance the family, can be very
Yes.
poetic. So
Yes.
all right, here's my next one. I don't know if you know that I have Filipino cousins. I don't know if we've ever talked about this.
We have not. This is hilarious.
Yeah, so I have an uncle who is half Puerto Rican and half Mexican,
Okay.
and he married a Filipino woman, and then my cousins are Filipino, Puerto Rican, and Mexican. Okay, so we've
Whoa.
had holidays, especially because they live out in California too. So we had holidays where we ate traditional Filipino food all the time,
Oh, what's
and
up?
and I loved it. But we had this debate and conversation at one of our family dinners, so I'm going to bring this to you and ask you if it's
Sure.
problematic or poetic, okay?
Okay, 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 okay.
This one is the fact that Filipino people have a dish called puto in light of the fact that they were colonized by Spain and have many other Spanish words in Tagalog, like basura, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's poetic because I think it was a stab in someone's face to call
Oh
it
my God, I'm
Spain.
so fucking funny.
It has
Oh,
to be. It
it's
has to
poetic
be.
as hell, yo. Puto. I always laughed every time I ate puto because puto is it, you know, puto, right? It means bitch, right? Essentially.
Yeah, in
Yeah,
Spanish.
right.
Yeah,
So in
yeah.
Spanish, right? So puto is like basically a rice cupcake. Essentially, it's like a rice cupcake that's really good. It's great. It's like a great dessert.
It's
You
like a
can dip it in
dessert
different
kind of
little
thing,
thing,
right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it is brought out at every parties. And it's like when the puto was brought out, it was wonderful. Everyone was smiling. Like, let me grab the puto real quick, and we would say it out loud, right? So you heard
Yes.
it all the time. And then I remember my friend. Oh my gosh! When I grew up, I had a Mexican best friend named Steven Gonzalez. His mom would come over to our house, to the my grandma's house during the party. She's like, steal me some of that puto. And she would laugh like all the time. She's like, what are you laughing at? She's like, I'll tell you later. And then when I learned later, I was like, oh dang, that's what it means. So,
Yeah.
it's so funny.
I'm like,
Very poetic.
y'all knew what you were doing. It's poetic. You knew what you were doing. It had to be that
Yes. I need to, you know what? I'm gonna
soldier
do
liked
some
it. I don't
research.
know.
I'm gonna do some research
Please.
for you and then find out why it's called that. Okay, I will.
Please, 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 please. I'm like, it is not a mistake that y'all are, that this is like
That's
this is
hilarious.
definitely a double entendre, right? Isn't that
For
what it's
sure, for
called?
sure,
Right,
for
it
sure.
has to be. Okay. I'm glad you agree with me that it's poetic. That was
Oh my
one of my
God.
favorite things to discover
Hell
about the
yeah.
Venn diagram of Puerto Ricans or Latinos
Oh hell yeah. Oh hell yeah.
Filipino
Puto.
friends. All right, next two more things. Problematic or poetic? Banning books.
Ooh, problematic. We know
To the point.
this.
Yep.
I mean, well, teaching the truth right now is a movement right now, right? Like, it's a movement to combat all the what, like, I mean, I think banning books has been a thing even before MAGA was a thing, right? So, like,
Yep.
but it was accelerated because of the MAGA, like, movement and
Yep.
whatnot. So now we're like fighting this whole battle. But, long story short, essentially, it is problematic because as educators, right, we need to be able to facilitate the information that is happening so they can make their own decisions of what is truth and what's not. But if
Yeah.
you're taking away the truth, then all you have is certain aspects of the truth, right? The single story, the
Yeah.
danger of the single story,
The danger
right?
of the single
So
story. Yep.
we'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Beautiful. Last one. Short and sweet. Instagram. Problematic or poetic?
Oh goodness, man. I keep hearing, sometimes I feel like it's a dumpster fire. Like this, it's all trash. Instagram's all trash, right? As a creator, we know we're creators. So we're like, it could feel like that because of the impending like algorithm that shifts all the time. And I'm like, am I being like, I don't know what the term is, but like where no one can see my content anymore? Like
Oh, they say
now
shadow banned. Yeah.
shadow banned, am I being
Yeah.
shadow banned or am my
Yeah.
content not making it? And then, it's driven by capitalism at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm not making the right content, I get exhausted. So it can be problematic. But then I'm meeting hella people on it, beautiful people in my network who are uplifting each other. Like I'm fighting for Asian American civil rights, education, and I'm fighting those people as well. So I'm like that. I think for that reason, it depends on the reason.
Yeah.
So it's a both and.
It's a yes and you're right. Some people
It's
have
a
told
yes
me,
and.
I get it all the time, go to TikTok instead. And I'm like, I have built community on Instagram. I literally interact with people on Instagram. So I have a TikTok, but I don't have folks
Yeah,
that I've like really interacted with over there. So it doesn't serve the same purpose to me.
100%.
But it just sucks because even people who do interact with me, people who support the work that I do, they don't end up seeing my stuff because of this algorithm. And it just, it sucks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But well, thank you for playing. I hope that was fun. You see, it was
Oh,
there
that
wasn't
was
right or
fun.
wrong
That
answers.
was fun. I like a little surprise because it keeps me on my toes. So I was like, you know what? Well, Sabrina didn't tell me to prep for this, so we're going freestyle. And you know what? I need to reorient and be a little more vulnerable. So I'm glad we did that.
Yeah, and it shows us it shows your perspective on the world too. Last week I played with Stacy and we did the law edition and that was fun.
Ooh.
Yeah, that was a good one. We did teach, mentor, or abandon on a field trip, and yeah, with the caveat that kids don't really get abandoned on field trips. Like we don't.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
she
Yes.
had me laughing so hard because I'd said Clarence Thomas, and she goes, he's not even allowed to come to school.
Exactly. On the field
Like
trip.
she's like, he needs to stay home and think about what he's done. So yeah, that had me laughing so hard. All right,
Oh my
let's get
gosh.
into some current events. So
Okay, let's
this
do
is
it.
gonna take it down a little bit, a little sad, but
Yes.
we have to talk about gun violence. So this is the fifth episode of the podcast, and it's crazy because I prepped the notes beforehand, and every time the events have gotten heavier and heavier, and it's over the short period of time. So like we started off, we're like, let's talk about student loans, and there was some things that happened with that. Then Uvalde happens. Then it was Roe versus Wade. Now July 4th, Highland Park outside of Chicago, and like people aren't talking a lot about how that's a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. They're not talking. And then there's also the caveat of like I saw someone posting a side by side of two different circumstances, but like this, I don't know if you saw on the news, there was a baby that people couldn't find the parents, and then it turned out that both of the parents were killed in the shooting.
That crushed me. That crushed
It,
me. Oh my gosh.
Horrible. But then there was a picture that someone put up a side by side of a different GoFundMe, and it was of a black child, and it was a shooting, and something happened, and the amounts of money that were raised were like staggeringly different, right?
Staggering
So we
different.
still have these like levels and
Oh
nuance
yeah.
to the tragedy. Yeah, it's just as an educator, right? Like we haven't been in the classroom for years, but or, I mean, I've been out a little bit sooner, but
Yeah.
this is something that we prep for. The guns are now a part of, they're beyond the classroom now. They're a part of everyday life. What is your thoughts on all of that?
Lord, so first of all, first and foremost, I think I'll share with you. I've actually been in gun situations as a teacher. Let me just first of all say as a teacher, okay?
Yeah, yeah.
And so when I was on first year teaching in Indianapolis, Woo, this is like bringing up some a little like traumatic experience because it's hella scary, right? And then it leaves the body. It's very somatic, right? So at the end of the day, one of the days when I was hosting a international and cultural event after school,
Mm-hmm.
a student comes up to me, was not my student, or maybe it was some student, right? But it was a high school student, comes up to me with a gun and was like, whoa. I was like, what is going on? Whether it was an airsoft or whatever, the fact that they
Mm,
chose that,
yeah.
had access to that,
Yeah.
was to me an issue.
Yeah.
So they stole my car. They terrified me for life, right?
Wow.
And it kind of just made me think about like safety for myself, safety for the community here, the
Mm-hmm.
stereotype, because after that moment, you obviously like the TV newscasters were like definitely hovering over trying to get a soundbite out of me to kind of
Wow.
paint the narrative of the community, which was, when I'm teaching it, when I was with Teacher America, I was teaching in a low income community, right? And
Mm-hmm.
predominantly in African American. So I did not want to paint that community in that
Right.
light, right?
If
At
that's what the news
all.
wants you to do,
Problematic.
though.
That's what
Yeah.
the news wanted us to do. So I was
Yeah.
like, I'm not going to not talk about that. So I kept it hush hush for a long
Yeah.
time, right? Until like
Mm-hmm.
recently. So that the fact that kids can have access to that, and then now teachers can have access to that, right? And they're having the option to, or they're being encouraged to defend themselves,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Whew.
It's hella problematic. I mean, like, we do the comparisons, right? I'm sure, recent shooting of President
Yeah.
Shinzo Abe, right? I lived in Japan
Mm-hmm.
for a year, right? And when
Mm-hmm.
he was in presidency, I believe, because he's been in for a while, and gun violence was so low because they have strict gun laws, right?
Right.
And recently there was a gun shooting of him, and I believe that like
Mm-hmm.
pro gun folks are like using that to be like, well, so
See? Yeah. Yeah.
see what happened,
Because it
like
was like a homemade gun, too, if I
it's a
remember reading
homemade
that
gun.
correct.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically they're saying no one's safe, and I was like, okay, y'all, like these gun laws actually do protect folks. If we're talking about a numbers game, which it
Yep.
is, you
Right.
take guns off the street, that will shrink the U.S. so much full. That's saving lives. So why
Yeah.
wouldn't we do that, right? So that's my biggest like sentiment towards it as well. It's like, why don't we take it off? We don't need it. Like
Yeah.
to me, I'm an abolitionist in this sense, right? Like we could abolish guns. Let's cut it
Mm-hmm.
out. We
Yeah.
don't need that. It only brings death.
Yeah.
And people will argue that it's it's for protection, it's for whatever, right? But if we did take it out of everyone's hands, which would take an enormous amount of time,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be seemingly impossible because of the Second Amendment, right?
Yeah.
But if we did, in an ideal world, then we would save lives, right? We'd see the number go down, and then we'd be able to focus on what the other thing is, because there's going to be another thing, of
Right.
course, that
Right.
people go to. But at the very least, we did something.
Yeah.
And it should not be in schools
Mm-hmm.
whatsoever. Teachers are meant to teach, and
Yeah.
that's it. And, we play many different hats. We play like
Yeah.
co-therapists, and we're supposed to hold boundaries, but when the
I'm not
therapist
trying to
is
put
not there,
sniper on the list like of things that I
no,
want to
no,
do.
I'm not trying to be no sniper.
Yeah.
I don't even have the option. I don't even have the
Right.
kids find out where my gun is, right? Because,
Yes.
I don't want, it's just not meant to be in a sanctuary, right? When
Yes.
schools are supposed to be sanctuaries, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's my
Absolutely.
hyper-focused aspect of guns and school.
I feel you on that. The whole conversation gets me so down and sad because I'm like there's no material thing in this world that I like enough to be willing to risk people's lives. And that's how it feels when people have conversations about guns where they're like we need them, we have the right to them.
Yeah.
But to me, with all of these people who are dying because of it, who are literally getting shot in public spaces, it's just not worth it. We went to a movie one time, me and my family, and someone started to have like a, I don't know if it was a panic attack or something was happening, but there was like, someone screamed in the theater,
Yeah.
and when she did that, everybody got down. How traumatized are we as a country that that's what
Oh my
happened?
gosh.
We all got down, and nobody knew because it was after what happened in I believe it was Aurora, Colorado, in the movie theater. It was way after
Oh
that. But
goodness.
we're so traumatized, and my brother was with me. He started crying, and then they gave us like free tickets to come back, and it turned out to be like nothing. I think she was like having some sort of like asthma attack, and she was okay. But the
Mm.
scream set off and triggered and traumatized everybody in the space.
Whoa. And
Yeah.
everyone felt that. that too, which was
Everyone
that's
does that.
telling.
Yeah.
That's telling.
It's a
Yeah,
collective trauma.
whoa.
It's a
It's a
collective
collective
trauma.
trauma,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
It really is just being in this country and yeah, it's just really
Waking up in this country every day is a collective trauma. It's like
it
it's waking
is.
up traumatic. It's like, whoa.
It is.
I need
And
to take a breath.
it's the complete opposite of the way that I think our generation was taught was this like American imperialism perspective of
Yeah,
America being
100%.
such a savior and we're the best, we're so smart, we're this, we're that. I've had this conversation that I didn't even know, and this sounds stupid to say, but I didn't even know that there were universities outside of the United States because the immigrant story is that you come to the United States for a better opportunity. You come here for
Yes.
school. Well, then what does that
Uh-huh.
tell me? That tells me that the other places don't even have schools or they don't have the opportunity. And then we're not even talking about like class and the people who do have money in those back home countries and all of this stuff where everybody's
Oh
from.
yeah.
This complete like insular mindset of being an American is so blech. I don't even have a
Oh
word.
no, I know. It is mad. It's like blah, and then it's
Yeah,
like
it's
it,
trash.
it seems hopeless. It's trash. It's trash.
Trash. So this is a little bit funny. The next thing we can move on to in the news. Did
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah,
see
yeah.
about the pregnant woman who got pulled over in the carpool lane and said that because of Roe v. Wade being overturned, her fetus should count as a second passenger in the car?
Wait, where's this? I need to look at this. Oh my lord.
Yeah. Yeah, she was like, I shouldn't get a ticket. It counts. It's a life. It's a second person in the car. I can drive in the carpool lane. I was like, that is a interesting form of
I see
activism.
you. I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah.
Ooh, wow. I need to look that up for sure. Well, I mean, like, there people are coming. People are definitely going to be using this moment to bring out their quick hits to come back
Mm,
with it. And I can't wait to learn more about it because we need, that's a form of defense right now. Because at
yes.
this point, like, we need protection. So I welcome all of the banter around this as well.
Yeah, and
100%.
sometimes you have to have a little banter because it's so dark.
It's
That's
so
even the
dark. Yeah.
conversation that or the point of having this podcast is like kind of lightening the things that are like trash and no one wants to talk
Oh,
about. But
I know.
yeah. All right. So the next thing that's on the list, this has been like bopping around a little bit, especially in the summer, and it kind of goes to something in our Q&A. Lots of news about how teacher retention across the nation is so low. And
Yeah.
so I saw a very interesting article that talked about this district in upstate New York. I know I'm going to butcher the name of it. I cannot pronounce this. It looks like it's Shohari, I don't know. Shohari Central School District. And one incentive they are trying to offer to bring teachers to the school is on-site electric vehicle charging. What do you think of that?
On-site electrical vehicle charging
Yeah.
for Show Public School. On-site
Yes.
electric, like, so this implies that all those folks have like these like electronic Tesla cars. Like, is that what they imply? Like, what is
Yes.
good? Like, what's going on in the world, yo? Like, I'm
Yes.
dead. I'm like, how much money does
Yes.
these teachers make? Like, what does this community have? Like,
Yeah.
what is this? What is the
The
dominant? What is the
article
makeup of the community?
the article cited how they sense a movement in the nation because most of the vehicle ads during the Super Bowl were for electric vehicles. As a person who does not like Elon Musk but really loves a Tesla Model X, I'm like, cool, yeah, great. But like,
Yeah,
this is your incentive?
this is your thing.
This is what you chose?
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. And you know what? That's hella expensive too. So I'm like, what are y'all doing?
Yeah.
I have so many questions for the makeup of the school, the leader of the school, the board who approved the budget that was an incentive to be delivered. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many
Yes.
things that go into a decision around
Yeah.
money
Yeah.
that it just boggles my mind that the product at the end is just kind of like, it's like, what the fuck? Like,
Yeah.
what's going on?
Yeah. I see there's other places. I saw some different articles on this about teacher retention as well, but there's some other places that are offering like a 4-day work week. Um, I can vibe
Okay.
with that. Yeah,
That's attractive. Yeah.
yeah, during the pandemic when we were doing remote teaching, they offered in the district in Chicago that you could have one day being like an async day completely. So for our school we
Oh.
did Monday, Tuesday was, full together synchronous work. And then Wednesday was completely async, and so the kids could reach out to you, you could get things done. And
Oh,
like,
nice.
it was fantastic. It was fantastic. It really felt like
Wow.
office hours for, or it was half day async, I think, actually. But still,
Yeah.
either way, it was just like a big chunk of your time that you were allowed to use to catch up on the things that you needed to do. I loved it. I really did.
Oh my Lord. There's so many things. There's so many already solutions, and we don't need to innovate. It's just people not willing to choose the solutions. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, no
Yes.
more innovation out here. America's obsessed with innovation. We don't need to do anything.
Right, right. It's
So,
already been thought of. There's
yes.
like nothing new or
Yeah.
nothing novel at this
Yeah.
point. It's just people choosing not to. Oh, yeah, that's beautiful. All right, well, let's take a little bit of a break, and then when we get back, we're
Yes.
going to talk to you and hear about your new book
Cool.
and your
Yes.
work, all that wonderful stuff.
Yeah. Dope.
Okay, so for those who don't know, we need to start off by doing a little bit of acronym unpacking because I was reading a bunch of articles
Mm,
about you, and we also know that in education, it is an acronym soup. So I have a
hmm.
couple that I want you to unpack for us, and then let me know if I missed
Yes.
any, okay? So the first one
Yes.
is ABAR.
Yes. ABAR. It stands for anti-bias, anti-racist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I heard that from a friend of mine, Liz Kleinrock,
Mm-hmm.
who runs Teach and Transform,
Love her
an
page.
amazing
I follow her
educator.
stuff.
Yep.
Yep.
Racial justice educator. And the I used to consider myself like a DEI educator, right? But to me, that word has been so watered down.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it does. Honestly, I keep questioning. I do DEI work, but I don't even know what it does sometimes. But
Mm-hmm.
ABAR to me is active and is more specific, right? So we're combating bias and we're combating racism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being able to name those two things and name where any of the oppressions kind of are rooted makes me as a facilitator, educator, a lot more specific, a lot more tangible. And when I'm tangible and specific, it's clear for whoever I'm working with, whether it's students, teachers, principals, whatever. So ABAR is the term, and a lot of people are using that term.
So it comes with that like premise that it's not enough to just say you're not racist. You have to be actively anti-racist, anti-bias,
Yes.
right? Like
Yes.
actively choosing that. Yeah.
100%. Because we exist in a racist system, in a biased system. And if you're not, it's like not, it's like, you can be in pause and then you can always revert backwards. So being active just keeps it going forward, right?
Not to hone in on this one specifically, or I saw some tweet that said the concept of systemic racism doesn't mean a whole bunch of racist people. It means that even if you remove those racist people, the system that exists still produces racist results. And so I
Exactly.
think that helps a lot of folks, like, kind of, not to say that we shouldn't take onus, but it's like it's not calling you a horrible person. It is saying that we
Yeah.
have to actively combat the system.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
I
and
love
so
the clarity.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So you kind of talked about this a bit. DEI. Explain what that is.
Yeah, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't know how more in depth we want to go into it, but diversity to me is like the makeup of identity, intersectionality, the makeup of your company, the makeup of whatever you're at your school, the clients you're serving, the students you're serving. If you're thinking about schools, let me start with inclusion. Inclusion is like, if you just take the word from it being included, who's included in making the decisions, in designing the programming in and of itself, designing the product, designing the thing that is going to the clients, going towards the people that is receiving your program, and who's able to, I guess, inclusion and belonging connect, right? Who feels like their identity feels valued and they can actually exist unapologetically themselves, right? Queer, trans, black folks, right? Can they exist in a space, right, without having to have a debt or a tax on them that's invisible to the dominant narrative's eye, right? Or can they just exist freely and get what they need? Which leads me to equity, right? Equity is like getting everyone's needs met, right? For me, as a cis hetero Filipino American male, or if I was a student at that time, I need something different than my black trans folks, right? Than my Latinx, or let's be more specific, Mexican or Chicanx American students, right? They need something very different. It all depends on the nuance and where they're at.
Yeah.
basically go deeper.
That leads to also, it's not an acronym, but a point of clarity that a lot of people don't know: equality versus equity. Do you want to describe that difference?
Yeah. Equality versus equity. Equity is like everyone getting all the same. Let's say like a bread on the table. If we're at the dinner table, everyone's getting the same thing. But equity is acknowledging the fact that, my son is allergic to X, Y, and Z, but am I going to give him bread? Am I going to give him the same food? No, I'm going to give him something that he needs, right?
Right.
That won't give him his allergy. So it's like getting the need.
That makes a lot of sense. I don't know why that when you just said this, maybe this is a horrible connection, but I was like, communism is about equality, not equity. Like, right? And that's not good enough. Like, it's not, because a lot of people who like a perfect vision of communism is everybody socialism or whatever. Yeah, because equity is giving the person, there's like that imagery they have where equity is, if people are different heights, you're giving them the box that they need to see over the fence.
Yeah.
And equality is giving them all the same box.
Right.
And we don't need it. Yeah. Okay. You just gotta throw in some communism.
A little communism in there, socialism, right?
Right?
Oh, we want to.
Why not? Let's alienate some people. All right. AAPI. What does that stand for?
AAPI stands for Asian American Pacific Islander. There's probably some following terms. I'm just going to go and spit them out already because we're talking about AAPI. Sometimes people use APITA, which is Asian Pacific Islander Desi American, Desi as in South Asian,
okay.
Or they use APISA, which is Asian Pacific Islander South Asian, depending on how the Desi or South Asian community identifies. And they also use, there's just so many terms for the Asian American Pacific Islander diaspora, AANHPI, which is the other major terminology. That's what I would say Teach for America when I was working on staff uses. Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, right? That's like the diaspora. I've been personally using APITA a lot more because I don't want to exclude the Desi American experience, right? Because they have a very specific experience. But then, just quick note on that is that it's always best just to say what you mean what you say. And if you're talking about Asian Americans, which ones, right? Pacific Islanders, which ones? Because at the end of the day, our bubble is too complex, too beautiful, too different to just like lump into one thing. But we do have some shared oppression, shared celebration in our group.
I love that. Yeah. Thank you for making that clarification because I did not know what APITA was. And then in an article, I read this acronym DEIB. What's that?
DEIB is another word, diverse, equity, inclusion, belonging. They're just adding that belonging aspect of it because people, it's not enough to be inclusive. I think like it relates to retention purposes too, and being seen in the company. Like the belonging aspect, I really had to critically think about what is belonging if I'm working with a company. Oh, this person feels included in the decision making, but do they necessarily feel like they can belong and be unapologetically themselves in a company? No, right? That's one indicator of how you can measure belonging.
Ooh. That's fantastic. And actually, kind of going back to the teacher retention aspect, I remember reading a while ago that obviously we know the teacher retention in general is very low, but the teacher retention for teachers of color is even lower than that. It's like the average is 5 years, and for teachers of color, it's 2 years.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. So last I checked, I haven't had, any nuanced data, but yeah, so there's a lot of different ways that teachers don't feel like they belong for many different reasons. Any acronyms that I missed that folks should know before we get into more about you?
No. I think those are the two main ones, yeah.
Okay, beautiful. So right now, you're studying at UW-Madison, you're writing your book, and like we talked about earlier, you decided to be the main caregiver in your family. So, or the day long, I shouldn't take away from your wife's caregiving as well, right? Yeah. So what does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, summer is different. So like I'm not in class yet. It will drastically change. Summer is different. Right now I'm still finishing up some consulting projects. So I can hold some consulting projects. So my work with Tony DelaRosa Speaks, which is like my company personally, and I'm the only one in it, I will hire out some contractors here and there if the project's big enough. But I do ABAR, right? Education work, DEI consulting, and that's more at the org level. Whether it's like a for-profit or a nonprofit or a school, and then speeches, right? I actually started for my IGs at Tony DelaRosa Speaks. I started as a speaking company to talk about and motivate people to think differently, essentially. And that's what I want to be as a professor, is to have that with more support, right? Because I'm like starting it from scratch as an entrepreneur is really tough. So my day to day is, I wake up, I literally take my son to school, right? Daycare. I'll call it school, but and thankful for daycare, because I'm able to live into my passion and do some work throughout the day. Right now, it looks different every day, I think. But I spend a few hours working on a speech here, right? That could be one day. And then I switch a project I take a little break, switch a project to consulting, right?
Okay.
And that's generally my day. It's either working on a speech or consulting something. That's like my day in and of itself. And then right around 4, I pick up my son, and then I hang up and be dad for the next couple hours. And then my wife gets off, and we are able to be hopefully good parents. So
right, do your family time together. I love that. What brought you into the field of education, and specifically the AAPI APITA work?
Let me start off way back, University of Cincinnati, when I went to my undergrad. The only major I could have majored in that was closely related to the diaspora, the Filipino American diaspora, and that's what I really wanted to study, Filipino American studies, honestly. But like you, Sabrina, I didn't know about college really. First gen, I didn't know about college, so I just applied to one school, and that was it. I was I did the ACT, I did horrible on the ACT, did my thing, and then I was I got in University of Cincinnati, it's a public school, it's nearby, it's literally 30 minutes down the road, let me go. And I picked the closest thing to that, which was Asian studies. And I was I thought that was Asian American studies. No, it was Asian studies. Asia. I was what am I studying about Asia when I need to work on ourselves in our community here?
Yes.
So that is a problematic thing in and of itself. The industry of just Asian study versus Asian American studies. And any college anywhere, you'll see an Asian department run by mostly a white person, usually a white man. Yes, if it's run by an Asian person, that's very rare. Probably on the coast, right? But here it's all these white men running Asian departments, doesn't make any sense. Usually acronyms, but whatever, I digress. So it starts from there. And I was you know what? I lived in Japan for a year, and I was what am I doing with my life? I'm just leaving my identity and my people, and I'm an activist. So what am I doing? Did some spoken word, started critically examining who I was in relation to the community at large. And I was I need to do work home. And where's my best, most proximate impact as an Asian American? And then I started just going deep into that narrative, following Asian American poets, APITA poets at large, and just saying oh shit, there's a lot of work to do in education for our community. And this is going to keep me busy and keep me passionate, waking me up every day to do the work. So it started really critically analyzing that difference at school.
That's beautiful. I felt very similarly. Thinking about Latin American studies is completely different than the issues that we have as Latinos in the United States. And going into an even deeper level, which I know you do as well when you think about your Asian American community, so much of the data that's on Latinos in the United States is about the Mexican American experience, and that is just not accurate to the demographic of the United States. Now, there are obviously a lot more Mexican Americans. Even I have Mexican American ancestry. My great grandmother on my dad's side was first gen born in Chicago. Her parents were born in Mexico, and then she married a Puerto Rican. Yeah, it went down the line, and so I'm much more connected to my Puerto Rican culture, but I'm 1/8 Mexican. So a lot of Latinos have that shared history, but when I am looking on the things that affect my community, when I am looking at even reading data, I'm not everything that was talking about reading data that had to do with Latinos talked about English as a second language. That is not necessarily the case for all Latinos in the United States. Specifically, the Puerto Rican community here in Chicago, English as a second language is not the issue when it comes to reading issues, right? Second generation Mexican Americans, not the issue. So just not having that nuance or that understanding, or only thinking of Latinos as of the place that they're from, is just completely missing the full story of everything.
Damn, yep. That's where I kind of want to learn a little bit more as well about to gain more people on our side about why we fight for data disaggregation, because it's not just an Asian American issue.
Yes.
Love it, love it, love it.
Explain the term data disaggregation.
Data disaggregation. We were just talking about it, but essentially, it's basically just going deep, going more specific with data and offering that data out. First of all, collecting that data when we're like collecting that data, for any company, any business, anything. If you're existing in the, in America, like in terms of ethnic and ethno-racial data, let's go back to the ethnicity. When you break data down from just race, because race is so broad, and Latino is an ethnicity, so people forget that. They put it as a race, and I'm like, yo, let's go deep and understand what this really means in sub-ethnic groups and see where they're at. Because if we're not collecting that data, then you're just doing the same thing. You're glossing over and providing a one size fits all solution to one group, right? And I don't need, back to that equity point, right? Filipinos don't need what Chinese Americans need, right?
Yeah.
Brown Asians, Southeast Asians don't need what East Asians need all the time, right? We're some people problematically use it, and I've also internalized it as like the poor Asians, right? Of the US. So going into data disaggregation, it's needed in every immigrant group.
I don't know how familiar you are with this, and I'm definitely not at all, but isn't this what the core of that Harvard case was about when it came to like affirmative action? It had to do with disaggregating Asian American data.
Yeah. So I think Edward Bloom, I believe that's the person who was like the one actually funding the project. But essentially, like the case was, they weren't disaggregating enough to the point where they were seeing that we do need affirmative action for some Asian Americans, right? Like Hmong folks, right?
Yes.
People don't even know they exist, right? Filipinos would fall into that because we're usually in the 50-50 category in terms of social economic mobility. Vietnamese, Lao Americans, right, who are impoverished. But then Harvard intakes, if you look at their admissions, from actually works for Asian Americans who are East Asian, right? And a lot of Asian folks that come from Asia, right?
Okay.
So that's what happens. It becomes a very hard, complex topic because they lump us all into one again.
Right. So
even with Asia, like Asian American and Asian, we need to disaggregate those two and don't lump us all into one.
Yeah, that is actually really, really fascinating, because I'm thinking about what you're saying is like they lump in the international experience with the American experience, and it's
100%.
just not true. Also, something I found fascinating when I learned about some stats in special, we call it diverse learning now. You don't use the term special education. The term changes all the time. But I learned how Asian American kids are underdiagnosed when it comes to receiving IEPs or specialized services because of like the model minority myth that folks don't think that the kids really have any issues, and it's this, misinterpretation, stereotypes, biases.
I bet. Oh my gosh. Yeah. First time hearing you saying that, but I totally will see that, because even as an educator, when I was teaching in my 6th year at Match Charter School in Boston, I did not know that my students at the time had an IEP because Baoni was manifesting those same stereotypes from her family. Like she was just like grinding hard to do what she wanted to do and produce, even though she needed a very specific, like she needed some, like she could not see really well. So I need to blow up some of the content to make it easier for her to access. I didn't know that she was going home and reading and like using her iPad to reread some of the material that I gave. And I was like, damn, you're doing double the work.
Yeah, she was providing accommodations for herself.
Yeah,
wow. It also, I remember reading in an article that you said some of your students made an assumption about you, where they were saying, we're going to learn math really good this year because you were Asian American, right?
100%, yeah.
So that kind of goes into the next thing I want to talk about. What was your classroom experience? What grades did you teach? Where were you at? All that beautiful stuff. Describe it to us.
Yeah. I taught 1 year abroad, so I still count this because it taught me pedagogy and how bad I was at it. So I taught in Japan. I taught USL in a house. That's where I started to learn. like at the end of that year, I started to get better at it, but I wasn't good at pedagogy. I found out that I was actually very authoritarian,
Okay.
using a lot of authoritative power, right? Which is both necessary, relational and authoritative power, right? Relational, using relationships, right? Authoritative, just like being able to be the leader and be like, hey, I'm directing the class. Here's why, right? Like
Yeah.
I get that power exchange. But when I was teaching my first year, when I moved to the US, I was like, wow, a lot of my authoritative um, power came out in my teaching practices because that's how I was taught. And that's how, as Asian
Mm-hmm.
Americans, we respond really well. Like,
Mm-hmm.
even in Asia, too, like when I was teaching that way, kids would respond in
Yeah.
that community because we've been socialized to accept that. Bow our
Yep.
heads, be meek, be humble, just do
Yep.
the thing. So when I was teaching low income brown and black kids, right, that was problematic.
Mm.
That vibe. And I was like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
You know, definitely part of my family, like
Right.
how I was, you know, kept accountable, and the Catholic Church, the
Mm.
patriarch, all that, like, was
Yep.
all manifesting in the classroom. And I was like, oh Lord. And it's manifesting in my parenting, sis. I'm
Mm.
like super, sometimes I can find myself super harsh in these
Yeah.
random moments with Sebastian. I'm like, why am I making a big deal about
Yeah.
he's not cleaning up his little block? He's 13 months old. Like, why? But the teacher told me that he should be cleaning up block, so we're gonna practice this. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, this disciplinarian is coming out, and it's
Mm.
still in my body, even though I unpacked a lot of my trauma already. So it
Yeah.
just goes to show how much it's all rooted from lived experience,
Yep.
and it's like you never know where it's gonna come out of, and
Mm-hmm.
you got to be active, like we talked about. We need to be anti
Yeah.
that. Otherwise, it will come out when we're not thinking about it, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's like what told me.
We could go on a whole tangent about that. I've been seeing so many videos about gentle parenting and
Me too.
right, first of all, why is I'm not a parent. I don't know why that's on my For You page. But just the fact that like a lot of folks are saying that so many people reject the concept of gentle parenting because they think it's not real parenting, or they associate it with weakness, when it's really just like having conversation with your child, helping them understand, and
Yeah,
I really
yeah,
tried to even utilize that in the classroom with like classroom management. I want you to understand why I'm making this decision. I want you to understand, like with my summer program, I'll give you a perfect example. They're teens, they're Chicago teens, and we have an attendance policy, but I put in the attendance policy, if you do not show up, I'm contacting your parent right away. And I was like, yes, I'm a snitch, but Chicago is a very big city. If your parents assume that you're with us, I want them to know that you are safe. And if you are not with us, I don't want you roaming around the city and you're in danger or something is happening to you. So I'm going to contact your parent because of that. It is not to tattle on you. It is literally to protect you and make sure that people know where you are. Now, if your parent lets you roam around and do all of that stuff, that's beautiful. That's fine. That's on them. That's not on me. But from my perspective, from my leadership, I'm going to make sure that you are safe and that adults know where you are. That's it. So explaining it to
safety,
them. Safety. It's
100%
about safety.
too.
Yeah.
And then getting that, yeah, the explanation is very key, because I think what is missing with a lot of folks who conflate it with just weak parenting is that they don't have a strong explanation as to why
Right. Right.
they're doing X, Y, and Z, and you just completely explain that.
Yeah. Leaning on the because I said so. So when you came back to the United States, what subjects did you teach and what grades?
Yeah, I did elementary, fourth, fifth,
Okay.
and then I jumped into seventh grade, eighth grade,
Mm.
sixth, seventh, and eighth. I did a sixth grade remediation course, which I'm so proud of that course, because we jumped so many levels in
Mm.
that reading course. My kids, I was just like, I just followed a curriculum. Honestly, I'll be honest with you. My relationships was key because we played
Mm-hmm.
fun games in that class,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a very, like, it was a phonics based lesson, so we caught them up, and I was so
Okay.
happy for that.
Good.
Seventh and eighth, did ELA and reading, both writing as well, and then one summer of ninth. So that's like a broad experience, but I
Yeah.
would say my core experience and my core grades that I'm like really an expertise on
Mm-hmm.
is middle school.
Middle school. What was your favorite novel to teach in middle school?
Oh,
It's hard to pick, right?
I'm gonna shout out my Asian Americans right now. Like Gene,
Okay.
I think it was like, oh, give me second,
It's like,
American, born
oh yeah, I love that
Chinese,
one. That's
Jean
a graphic novel,
Luen
right?
Yang.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, Jean Wen Yang. And it was so good. Just to
Mm.
see how much kids love graphic novels and novels when they're
Mm-hmm.
shown imagery,
Yeah.
aka art,
Yep.
woven into multimedia work, and it meets them at where they're at, right? You can
Yeah.
have a deep conversation with a comic and a graphic novel, and people don't get that. So I'm
Yeah.
glad we did that. It was healing for me to teach
Mm.
it. It was healing for my students to teach it. So I think that was why it was such a pivotal book for me.
Yeah, you actually really impacted me to also make sure that I included more Asian American voices in my curriculum. I think that a lot of
Yes.
educators in general are like, first of all, you teach the things that you like, right?
Yeah.
And that's the problem when you have a high population of white teachers and you don't have diverse teachers. They end up teaching what they like, and so that's why we have such a white canon in the classroom.
Hmm.
And I was trying to be actively anti that. And so I tried to provide mirrors for my students. And of course, as you
Yeah.
get further into the classroom and you're teaching for longer, your curriculum starts to adjust. But I would start off, and I had a lot of representation of Black and brown folks, but I really missed out on Asian American experiences. And I will say that when I did end up adding, because you and I had a conversation about poetry, and you were like, I want you to include these poets
Mm.
and make sure that you're
Yeah.
including, like, Asian American voices in that. And so I did. But then
Oh yeah.
when I included novels, I also knew that I didn't like the way that my novels about Asian Americans centered on Asian American struggle. Like we did They Called Us Enemy by George Takei, right? And so that was a
Oh, okay.
fantastic text because we also
I
read
never
it
read that.
after reading Night. My kids read Night, and it was
Oh,
fantastic. Like, so,
whoa.
right. So, and they
You
loved
can see
it.
the overlap. Yeah.
Right, because I think when you end up talking about the Holocaust, a lot of times, again, it's from an American imperialism point of view, and it's like, we were so wonderful, we saved everybody, but let's talk about
Uh-huh.
what happened here to Asian Americans. But I didn't have enough Asian American joy. I didn't have enough Asian American, like, positivity, and I
Mm.
really am sad that
Mm.
I didn't.
Yes.
But at least acknowledging and knowing now that I
Me
work in
too.
curriculum
Me too,
development
sis. Like, I
work.
did not have enough. I did not have enough too. Like, that is something like I think we can just broadly talk about. Like, if we needed a training on and to focus on and have us as educators like make sure that we do and don't forget about. I think that's definitely something that needs to be placed in the scope and sequence of a PD
Yeah,
sequence. Like,
yeah.
make sure you never forget about joy, because most of them are written from the oppression perspective. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I actually am going to a PD next week on Asian American education because in
oh,
Illinois it's been
the Teach Act.
mandated now. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And so now I'm gonna go to one of those sessions because I'm like, I need to broaden my perspective. Like,
Oh
we
my
all
God.
do. Yeah,
Yes.
we all do.
Yes.
I'm trying to hold multiple things. I read something really interesting, kind of going along this line in one of your articles. You addressed AAPI male
Yeah.
identity, right? And
Yeah.
you talked about how toxic masculinity exists, but it looks different for AAPI men. Specifically, you talked about how they're I'm gonna butcher this term, effeminized, yet at the same time, Asian American culture is very patriarchal. I found this super
Yo.
fascinating. Can you dive into that?
100%. And it's something I'm still trying to unpack right now, because, the patriarchy is in all of us, because the patriarchy is the system built that we exist in, right? From country to country,
Right.
imperialism is built on patriarchy, right? So imperialism comes from almost all the countries that we've, that is out here, right? So that is like a starting place. And then when I think about my home, even though the Philippines is a matriarch, in my home, like, my dad embodied patriarchal norms, right? And my mom adjusted to those norms too, So, like, of course I'm seeing and absorbing it. And then I'm now, like, zooming out, going into and growing up and seeing it through poetry, through the lens. I'm like hearing it from all these poets, right? Like, the patriarchy and being stereotyping as effeminate. And I was like, I so see that, because when I was growing up, I would see myself as, like, secondary. I would do just anything I would choose was, like, more in the feminist labor market under that lens. I'd be like, okay, why am I doing
Okay.
this? Why am I not, like, feeling confident in myself as a male? as a cis man, why am I not being confident in this? Dating. Let's talk about dating. Juicy stuff, right? Juicy stuff. I'm like,
Yeah.
you know, that stereotype about Asian Americans in general. Like, there's a lot of thing about body size, how we act, how we're weak, right? In comparison to the white stereotype, right? You think about the whole porn industry, right? That in of itself is also daunting, right? And that is not talked about in nuance, and that's not talked about in truth. So I'm like, yo, we need to get to the center of all of this because that's impacting a lot of Asian American males. And I need to talk to other teachers who are teaching because I want them to feel confident. I want them to know their magic because everyone has magic, like we're leaning onto joy. And I want them to know that they don't have to embody this, like, this hyper masculine side because you've been stereotyped as effeminate. Because that's what usually happens is that you've been stereotyped as effeminate. So you come out and you're like, I'm not this person. No, I'm not. So I'm hard, right? And that starts to traumatize other kids in the classroom, right? And then other Asian students, where there's a lot in New York where I used to work, there was a lot of students who are Asian American and they would see that embodiment and be like, oh, so I have to be that way too. This really strong Asian guy that's short, but like I have to be super, like, I need to hold this kind of like mentality that I cannot be both and or fluid in my identity. So there's so much into that. Yeah, let's just leave it at that because I dropped a lot of gems there in terms of where the tension is, but there's so much more. You can talk about Confucianism, we can talk about so many different things, but what's resonating with that aspect of
You know what came to mind right away in critical race theory class when we were at Harvard, Joseph Keesall, who you know, amazing human, he did a presentation in the class with his group and they talked about dual subjugation, right? So like being you know, I'm not going to describe this correctly, I think, but like if you are, or it's like, it has to do with intersectionality as well. So, right, the way that black women experience the world is very different than white women because you might have the feminist lens, but then you have the racist lens that comes through that, right? And so he actually talked about it in terms of Asian Americans on dating apps. So very much connected to what you were just saying. Like there was a article he read, or maybe this was the title of their presentation, that was like a bio that someone had written in the dating app, and it was like no fats, no femmes, no Asians. Like those were the people that they wouldn't date. Yeah, so that kind of resonated with me. Or even our friend Linda and I have had conversations a lot about lead characters and what people perceive as like hotness with Asian American men, right? Like who's able to be the lead in certain shows, or even in these shows now where you have an Asian American character, he's like super buff. He has to be the football player. He has to be like very much an overcompensation of
hyper.
masculinity.
Yep.
Because
Absolutely.
he's Asian. Yeah. So that's really sitting with me, and like I don't even have like it's just all these examples, boom, boom, boom. Everything that you're saying, I can understand. Even Joe Coy's, I think his name is Joe Coy, the comedian. His joke about so many Filipino men going into nursing, and that also is like, you know, the subjugation of like nursing is a feminine field, education is a feminine field. People thinking that and then disrespecting the field. Woo!
There's so much there. There's so much there. Like I'll say one last thing on this note is like even growing up, like my relationship Asian women was very interesting because I would never approach a date one, because in my own family, all the Filipino women, for the most part, would date white men. And that is a topic, one, neither here or there anymore because I have no control over, but that is a pattern that I've noticed. And to me, I root it into some type of colonial mentality because I'm like, why is this a pattern across that after, well, I've heard this before. I heard my cousin say like, this little fishy, I ain't dating this little fish, you know, like in relation to Asian men. And I'm like, what the? So that probably kind of came in, but the next best thing, right? It wouldn't be like a black person. It wouldn't be like a Latino or Latinx person. It would be a white, it was like you said, it was like back to imperialism, right? It's back to like a white gaze. And I'm like, okay, that is going on. And I'm here in Madison, right, looking around, and I'm like, there's Asian folks out here. And then I'm like noticing who's dating who's paired with who, and I'm seeing that pattern again. And I'm like, no. So
Yeah. One of these days, someone I hope to bring on the podcast is someone who is knowledgeable in research about dating and dating from a
Oh yes,
POC
please.
perspective, because I have so many thoughts on just specifically, I will say that I know so many women of color who struggle with dating in
Yeah.
general. I think it has to do with like a lot of patriarchal
Yeah.
norms. I think also it has to do with our over policing and the industrial prison complex, because how many of our men are
Yes.
institutionalized because of that, right? Like,
Yes.
you're literally limiting my dating pool because you're jailing men for weed.
Ooh. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's all
Yeah.
connected, although those are just like my feelings about it. I don't know. I don't have any
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
data to
Yeah.
back.
You want to look at the
Right.
research? Yeah.
I would like to talk to someone about that, and then what that also turns into when it comes to interracial dating, from especially with a white partner, because I think there are some folks who like to share their culture from a perspective of like, here is the thing that I have, I want you to see this. And then there's other folks who are like, here's the thing that I have that's part of my culture and I want you to understand it in the way I
Yeah.
do. So like in my relationship now, I'm with another Puerto Rican person, and like I don't have to explain certain
Right.
things
Right.
to him,
Right.
whereas with other partners I did. And so there's just a lot of different like nuance. And the amount of times that I was called exotic, that I was called spicy from different
Hmm.
people, and I can imagine Asian American women with white men might experience that same
Yeah.
thing. And I think it's just whether or not you internalize it as a positive or a negative.
100%. Mm-hmm.
And for me, I very much internalized it as a negative, and I was like, "Don't talk to me,"
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. So it's
Rightfully so.
messy. It's a little
Messy.
messy, yeah. And that impacts the first of all the
Yeah.
effeminization and of certain men, and then the feminization in general of
Yeah.
education impacts who becomes teachers in the
Yeah.
classroom. And you talked about that a lot, how like the teacher population does not represent the student
Yeah.
population. Do you want to go into some more of
Yeah.
that?
I mean, it doesn't. We know. I mean, 80% of the U.S. In public schools, at least, our teachers are white. Right. You see the school leadership. It's like same thing. The percentage is like 80 to 90% school leadership is white. So of course, like some of a whiteness and white dominant culture is going to transcend and trickle down whatever the culture set, right, at every school and every system. It always does, right? So there's that, just by representation and how culture flows downward. And then the last thing I will say is, yeah, like, I mean, what Asian Americans make up, what, trying to see, like 2% of the population teaching workforce, which is just it's nuts to me, because like Asian Americans are growing. It's like the fastest growing racial group in the country right now, right?
Didn't know that.
So
Wow.
yeah, there's a lot of I think I saw that on NBC Asian America. It's been coined a lot, especially during the Stop AAPI or Stop Asian Hate movement right now. And we're one of the, I think, if not the fastest Asian, racial group in this country. So I just think that people need to get ready and prepared to teach us to be nuanced in our diaspora. Yeah.
Well, then that leads into the next part. Let's talk about your book, Teaching the Invisible Race. What is this book going to be about?
So the invisible race, I'm using Asian America. I'm not a nuance on this. A caveat is I'm not specifically focusing on the Pacific Islander or Native Hawaiian perspective, just because they deserve their own book. They deserve, I could not do justice to that. So it's mostly like East, West, North, South, Southeast Asian American diaspora, specifically American, right? So I wanted to be specific there, talking about disaggregated data, right? And then
Yes.
two, Wiley and Josie Bass is under Wiley. So Josie Bass reached out to me after speaking with Elena Aguilar. Like I had a quick IG chat with her about the book on coaching for equity, because I used to be a education coach. And from there, they just offered me the role because they saw that as a big gap in education. And then when I looked it up too on Google or like Amazon, I was like, yo, there's not a lot of Asian American books out there how to teach us, right? So that's the kind of like what spurred this, what spurred why we're doing this. And then I just know that I want better for my son. Like he's gonna go to school, right? He's not gonna see these images. He's going to school with mostly, if not all, white kids right now, right? He's already at such a young age, 13 months, right? Internalizing what is the dominant
Yeah.
look. Who is the teacher? Who's the lead teacher in the class? Who's the sub teacher, right? Who are the images around me, and who am I feeling safe around right now, right? So I want safety to be, I want that to be taught in this book as well. The book is actually, the subtitle is like how to, let me like bring it up real quick because it could be changing. I'm still working on the subtitle. It says how to embody a pro-Asian American lens in your school community broadly, right? And it goes with, let me just read a poem real quick and what kind of spurred this. Is that cool? Let's do some art. Let's do some art. So I'm gonna read this poem that kind of spurred this, and it's called "How Will They Hold Us?" And it's kind of be the book catalyst of the book of the start of the book, right? And it's inspired by the Teach Act, actually, from Illinois, which mandates Asian American history to be taught across the state. How do they hold us? What separates a mandate from a movement are the shepherds who inherit the stories. And what will teachers do with us? Fastest growing racial group, 48 countries deep, 2,300 languages, not including dialects for days that could quench the gods. Who will carry us Atlas like Yori did Malcolm at his darkest of hours, like the Black Panthers did Yellow and Brown Power at the International Hotel, the Filipino-American War, and beyond Vietnam? How loud will they teach this invisible race beyond the silence outside of October and May? What if they drop us? Will they pick us up like a fallen soldier, or will they stumble over and fumble us forgotten? Who entrusted them with our spices, jackfruit, and diamonds? What love will they rough? Will they style us windows and pick up a mirror? Will they dance a revolution, or will they wallflower reform? Will they fall and rise like us? Will they study our movements? Do they know us beyond a hashtag, beyond San Francisco and Times Square? Do they know us beyond the black and white binary, yet understand racial triangulation? Can they name our mothers before our fathers? Will they name themselves allies after they discover our names in a book club that doesn't scent of our sweat, blood, and dust? Will they play our battle drums? Will they plant our chrysanthemums? Finished. So that's kind of the poem that ushers the book of like how will educators hold our narratives, and how will they do it? You know, shout out to Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Chicago, you know, all the activists on the ground in Chicago, because y'all spurred the nation, like make us visible, which is another coalition I love, to fight for Asian American history to be taught in schools, which some of it's passing, right? Which is so cool. But that's the book. Like the book is going to be helping educators embody a pro-Asian American lens tangibly and help them reflect as well. Like, what does it mean to reflect on like your identity, your mirror, your window, and your sliding glass door? Back to Emily Stiles, right? How to read content, and how do you, again, like that pro-Asian American, which is the very last section of the book, which is like, let's talk about just all the oppression, the colonialism, imperialism, all that stuff. Let's talk about the joy, the pop culture, the dope things that we bring to the culture, like anime. Let's talk about like music. Let's talk about all the pop culture hits that kids are raving about today. That if you don't talk about them, you're missing out.
Yeah, we have no Korean classmates in the school, but everybody loves K-pop, right? So like, we need to understand that, and we also need to teach our students how to treat that culture with respect as well.
Yes.
Right? Like you can't just suck and take from a culture without respecting and understanding it.
I love that. What you just said there, because people just consume and then throw us away, right? Like treat us better than you love our food. You know what I mean? Because you'll eat our food per days, but throw us away like trash. Boom.
Absolutely. Man, I love, you know what this is bringing me back to when you're talking about what you're going to have in this text? Something I think is really missing from teacher education is this cultural work. We take classes on classroom management. We take classes on pedagogy in general. We take reading. We do social studies. And we never take the time to stop and think, what is your culture? How does that impact your classroom space? How do you work to understand cultures that you're unfamiliar with? Because as a good educator, I should be able to walk into any space and work really hard to understand that culture and respect it and embrace it and just like create a safe space with the students, because you're not going to be able to create a safe space if you don't understand where your students are coming from. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
we need that. We
10
need
out of
in
10.
teacher education programs, we need text like this. We need understanding like this. I'm mad, not even just sad. I'm mad and disappointed that I went through so many years of teacher education, and it took my friend from the culture to tell me to teach more Asian American materials in the classroom. That makes me angry. I've interacted with way too many
Right.
professors, you know?
Hmm. Ethnic studies, like, we're still fighting for that right now, even though we know the impact of how it changes lives, right?
Yeah.
So why are we fighting for that if we know it changes lives and we know that our population is going to be hella diverse? 50% of
Yeah.
the population, like, is going to drastically shift in the next 50 years, right? It's going to be less white. It's going to be more mixed, multiracial. And even that perspective, like, I'm going to try to include that in the book as well, because the multiracial, multi-ethnic perspective is often forgotten in these, as we know, like at Harvard Ed School, like, they never, like, it's hard because they, even how schools structure affinity groups or ERGs are like just one
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
race, right? When,
Right.
we were building out the Filipino Student Union, like, low key, because we needed our own thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, you needed something that was separate. So
yeah.
I shared with you that I envision, when you're talking about this text, when you even read the poem, I envision it being something that could be so impactful in early teacher preparation. What
Yes.
do you envision this text? Is it along the same lines, or do you envision it with like teachers who are in the classroom already? What do you see?
Like, I've been told by many people to be specific with your audience, right? Which critically, that's great critical feedback. I'm trying to figure out who this audience is actually, because if it's for the school community, like, I really, like, my expertise is that upper elementary to middle school, right?
Right.
So for sure, that's gonna be super resonant with that group, specifically for ELA and any humanities course, social studies, because I'm gonna be having, it's gonna include content from that, right? That could
Okay.
be leveraged and used, right? But
Love
not
it.
to say that a STEM teacher cannot find value in this work, because they're going to be teaching those same students, right?
Right.
And if you're not teaching Asian students, this is even more important for you, because you're building citizens who are going to be interacting with them. And
Right.
we need co-conspirators and allies, right? So you
Right.
need to buy this book, right? So
Yeah.
that needs to be said. And then something to be said about administrators who don't think about this stuff. I coached a principal my first time this year, right? They had no idea that we went through all the things we went through. They're busy, right? They're going through it. She's a black woman, right?
Yeah.
You would think that she would be attuned to all this stuff, but she's not. Only because she's seen it before, Stop Asian Hate Movement. Only because she's been so busy. She's working in a capitalist white supremacist system, so she has to
Yeah.
turn in all these things. So I'm not blaming
Right.
her for not knowing, but the same
Right. Right.
rate, I'm
Right.
like, here's a resource, use it. So that just goes to show that we can't make any assumptions of what people know about the Asian American experience. And
Right.
because I know that a lot of leaders don't know how to teach this work, educators are not going to know, and we're going to need we need people to do application work. So this will be like applicational work with educators, right? Because the policies can be a great policy, that's cool, but who's actually going to teach it the right way, right? In a
Right.
just
Right.
way. That's my big question around it right now.
Even the concept of it being, when you use the term invisible race, I see it in two different ways. Like my own education experience, I did interact with a lot of Asian American folks. The neighborhood that I talked about, where there was a lot of Latinos and then the white folks were Polish, there was tons of Filipinos in the neighborhood as well, right? So that was present in my education. But in my teaching, Chicago is very, very segregated, right? In my teaching, I was in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods, and so there were no Asian folks who were there. So how do I make sure to do justice to this population that is for all intents and purposes invisible to my students, or long distance to my students because they know K-pop? They don't know an Asian person that they interact with on a day-to-day basis. So thinking about that in terms of teaching, how do I encompass and do justice? And like there's a lot of like depth
Yeah,
to it that people just need to understand. So I see the value in what you're doing. Absolutely.
for sure, for sure.
So in terms of all of that, I guess the last thing is thinking about your work. What does like perfect coalition building look like to you?
Yeah, I feel like Coalition building is, you have a shared mission, right? You come together, like anyone can build a coalition for and we'll see like for whatever time it's necessary, right? You have to figure out how long you're going to be in the coalition for. Why are you building the coalition in the first place? What is it centered around, right? It's different than like an ERG or like affinity group, right? The coalition is aimed at bringing resources together to advance a cause, right?
Yeah.
That's
What's
part
an
of it, like a
ERG?
caucus. ERG is like an employee resource group, right?
Okay.
That's for like companies, for-profit companies or whatever. That's what the term they use, right? Which to me is like an affinity group, at the end of the day. But essentially it's different than that because you're not just building safe space, right? Safe space for your own kind. You're building networks that could be cross-racial, cross-ethnic. It could be intersectional practice where it's like even bringing in a different identity that intersects sex, right? Sexual orientation, anything like that. But the purpose is bringing resources together to advance a cause, right? Like a caucus. A caucus brings resources to come in to advance policy, right? Advocacy work. Coalition can be broader in that nature, right? So one of my favorite coalitions right now is the Black and Asian Souls Unite coalition, which is online. It's an Instagram. That's a coalition in itself, right? It's Black folks and Asian folks, right? Trying to, uplift the awareness between Black and Asian tensions, which is hella tense, right? But there's also a lot of joy between our communities that never gets talked about, right? Well, because the people are obsessed with, trauma. People are obsessed with oppression, right? People are obsessed with conflict between, that's what white supremacy wants us to do, right? To fight.
Yep.
So they uplift the, what's happening between the Black and Asian community, but they also show a lot of love, which I love as well. And that's the stuff that I love to see, is that they're bringing resources. They're responding to comments that are online that are just hella problematic. Like, Asians are crazy rich. Why didn't they give in Black folks X, Y, and Z? Black folks, they don't care about Asians. They always hitting on us, whatever. I'm like, we need people to respond to that. And what better than the people from the community, right?
Right.
So that's one of my favorite ones. That's how they're bringing their resources, their lived experience, and their resources online to make sure they're able to respond, teach, and educate broader communities online that follow. So yeah, that's one of the ways that coalitions are strong. And then the coalition talk can be its own podcast, my friends. So let me just end with, for coalitions to when I talk about coalitions, like a few coalitions, another coalition that I love as well, that I'm a part of, that I'm learning a lot from. Like TFA, when I came from Teach for America, TFA is Men of Many. I'm obviously a part of this one that's like a Men of Color coalition, similar to NYC Men Teach, which is another Men of Color coalition, because men of color rarely get the space to talk with each other. And this coalition brings educational resources to have that topic, talking about toxic masculinity, the feminine side of things, how different it is between different ethnicities, and also what does joy look like, and how do we kind of like bounce off of each other's joy? Because I never get to celebrate Black joy the way that, and then from the Black community, they don't get to see what Filipinx joy looks like, and we pay homage to your joy because you kind of, Black folks have started and like spearheaded that work, right? Right now in popular culture. So why can't we use that mode to like celebrate ourselves and keep us thriving, right? But at the same rate, pay homage to you. So those are two that I love right now. In education.
Is there anything else that you want folks to know about your book? Anything that they should be looking forward to when following it?
Yeah, I mean, we're still working on a subtopic, title, but the release is going to be September 2023, around that time. I will be doing like a book tour around that time. Maybe we can do a spin around back when it's published.
Yes.
Come back on on this podcast and talk more. By that time, maybe I'm doing my own podcast or my own like talk show on IG. To see what people are learning from these trainings in Illinois. Since you are in Illinois, I would love to hear from a non-Asian perspective, to hear what you're getting from the book, what you're getting from content in the state of Illinois, because I'm going to be focused specifically on areas of the Midwest, where it's predominantly white, right? People of color are definitely this is definitely helpful for people of color as well, because I do address the mirrors, windows, and sliding door aspect of this book. You can see in all aspects of this book. But predominantly, I think what I feel like is gonna challenge a lot are white folks who don't have proximity, who don't
Yeah.
have a lot of windows into my experience outside of their either relationships or what they see on TV, right? So this is
Okay.
going to be challenging for them. So just wait out
Yeah.
for September 2023. I'll talk more about it on at Tony Rosa Speaks. I'll be giving sound bites about what the book's about leading up to it, and hopefully it shifts. It informs my work and as a PhD student around how do we build strong coalitions to push ethnic studies policy, and
I
that's like
love
my
it.
focus on my PhD. So stay
Okay.
tuned. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, we're definitely going to stay tuned. We'll definitely reconnect when that comes around. Let's get into some Q&A. You ready?
Yeah.
All right, fantastic. So, two really great questions. The first one kind of goes back to classroom experiences. So, what was the hardest moment you had as a teacher dealing with the behavior problems or a student and their family?
One of the hardest ones was I think, is, I remember in Match, since Match was like my last school that I taught at, one of the students was, like this was gone. It was past hours already, right?
Wow.
And I was the like homeroom teacher. So, everyone's looking for the student.
Uh-huh.
Everyone's looking for the student. Like I get a text from the principal. Where's Desiree at? Where's Desiree? I'm like, I know, I'm home. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
home. This is 7 o'clock. Like where's Desiree?
Yeah.
So I think this speaks to like boundaries. One,
Mm-hmm.
the relationship of me and the student, because we were tight. They
Mm-hmm.
trusted who I was
Yeah.
and how we were able to solve this issue. Right.
Mm.
Obviously, I cared so much so it was like, like I kind of overstepped my boundaries because like at the end of the day, if it's about safety and danger, I
Mm-hmm.
am die hard for my students. Like we
Right.
gonna do something about it. It's like family, right? So I'm like, where's Desiree? Let me ask her friends, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
why it's so good to have relationships with all the students because
All
at
this.
that time of
Yeah.
night, and parents, right? Am I allowed to be
Mm-hmm.
contacting these students outside of this time, right?
Right.
I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, let me talk to the students with clout who know all the students, right? Let me talk to
Mm-hmm.
Glody. Have you heard from this person? So luckily, back channeling through some students who are friends with Desiree, I was able to find out where she could be, right?
Okay.
The principal had no idea because they didn't have the relationship that
The
I had.
relationship.
So a lot
Yeah.
of the labor fell on me to find out where this student
Mm-hmm.
was. And found out it was at her boyfriend's house, at night, like,
Mm-hmm.
so that was really tough to just figure out, like, okay, now I need to find out how to get to this, how do I communicate with her mother, because the mother's the one who was looking, right? Like, I have
Oh,
not seen
okay.
Desiree. Have you seen Desiree? And Desiree one time came to my poetry after school program, so she thought,
Okay.
oh, this is why. Desiree said that she went to my after school program, and
Ah,
that's
but she
why
see, that's what I'm talking about with my summer kids. Yes.
they didn't
Yeah.
come. And
Mm-hmm.
she said that she was with me, and like parents
Yeah.
always call me up. They're like, Tony, have you seen anywhere? Did she ride the T home, which was like the transit home?
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know, like I did not see her at poetry club today.
Uh,
So that's something that is really tough, is like when you have these tough relationships, the fortunate thing is like they trust you. I wasn't blamed
mm-hmm.
for like some, I don't know what could have happened. I wasn't blamed for this. All they were doing was like trusting me to point them in the right direction, which it
Right.
was. Like we did fine. At the end of the day, it
Yeah.
was fine. So thank God. That was one of the hardest things because I was worried. Like it showed how much like my relationship was with that student. I was like, wow, I have a really strong
Mm-hmm.
relationship and I'm really worried for
Yeah.
them. As we should be. At the same time, like I need to cook dinner. I need
Mm-hmm.
to
You have
work
to
on
live your
other
own life.
projects that I have. Yeah, my wife's
Yeah.
here, so
Yeah. Man, that is a tough one. I had shared on my IG because actually we got this question through Instagram, and I said I was going to share my story about this, and it involves the one time I cried in education.
oh Lord.
So, yeah, normally I did not have behavior problems. I never took them personally, never, because when a student had something that was going on that led to quote unquote negative behavior, it was a them issue. And our job as an educator is to understand what the them issue is and how to resolve that. Because I knew the type of educator that I was, I knew that classroom management wasn't my fault and it wasn't directed at me. But one year, there were two students who I don't know what flipped in them, and they decided that they hated me. They really decided it, like straight up. And so one day they came into the classroom and were saying it then became, their behavior became intentionally targeted at me. And they were just like saying things that were like digs at me as a human. And then even one of the things they said was like, we were sitting in a circle doing like the SEL time, because I always did stuff like that. And they started saying stuff about like their other favorite teacher, right? It was this other teacher who was in the, that we did like rotations with. And I loved her. Like, we were great together. And some of us she had really good relationships with some kids, and I had really good relationships with others, but they all felt safe around us all in general. But when these kids were doing that, I knew that they were doing it to target me. Like, it was really trying to just grind at me. And so in front of them, I was like very strong. I was like, okay, I'm glad that you're going to have a good time with her. Like, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. And then we like transitioned, took them to the lunch, and I went to go see my mentor teacher. And I went to her and I was like, I have never, ever had kids bully me. And these two boys were bullying me. And I don't know what it was, the wind and the air, what was going on. And I just broke down and cried, because I was like, I'm literally being bullied at this point. I had never had that before. Never. And so that was a really, really tough situation. And then of course, I've tried to talk to their parents, and they didn't like it either. The parents were like, what, are you kidding? And so that was like, I always work to have good relationships with the parents and the families as well. So that wasn't a problem, but it was just like, I think after that, bringing the parents on board, they were like, are you kidding? Like, with telling their kids, like,
Yeah.
What is this? So yeah, that was the one time. And then of course, Linda was like, you only cried once in teaching. She said she cried very often.
I cried multiple times. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, no, that was the only. Another time I cried was because we were on a field trip, and it was a very traumatic experience, but the back of the bus opened on the Chicago Skyway. And my kids,
God.
Yes, these bus systems are horrible. The kids screamed, and just like without even thinking, I ran on a moving bus towards the back and went to go and slam the door. So I reached out of a moving bus, slammed the door. It was just so traumatic. And then we even had to, like, the bus driver stopped on the middle of the Indiana Skyway, like Indiana to Chicago. We could have been hit. It was all of this horrible stuff. And the second that we got back to the school and everyone was luckily safe, I just like broke down in my assistant principal's arms, and I was crying because I was like, I saw my life flash before my eyes. Like, I almost ended up on the front window of a Honda Civic behind us. Like, it was traumatic. But those were the only two times that I cried and had bad behavioral problems in teaching.
Oh my gosh. I mean, after talking about it, I know there's so much bubbling up. You just had to activate prior knowledge, but there's so much in my head. So that's not the only one. That's just the most resonant one. We can go on and on about this topic, because to say that nothing shook me, I was shook. I was shook in education many times, especially when kids are bigger than me. So when you say bully, like, there are moments when I didn't know how to work with a 504, student, behavioral disabilities class, like, but I was placed in a class like that, and the kid, I did not read the 504 enough, so it triggered the student to get up to me like this, and like, I was like, oh snap, I'm not about to be in this. I'm a lower, not a fighter. This ain't I'm not going to be in that position. I'm not going to be that teacher either.
Right.
So there were moments like that where I was like, okay, I wish I had better skills at that moment. I'm a better person now, but I wish I had better ways to respond. To be more gentle, like you said, at the end of the day, in terms of how I parent. Like, seeing parenting identity is such a strong identity now, like gentle parenting, and I'm trying to unlearn all the disciplinary things. I wish I could take that into my education, right, and go backwards and do it better, right? So, anyways, you live and you learn.
Yeah. I read the 5 love languages while I was teaching, and I realized that you could use those on students as well.
I love that.
And I tried to understand, like, okay, this kid needs a lot of affirmation. This kid needs to be, give it here. I got extra Post-its for you. Like, that's a gift, right? Like, there's little things that
Hugs,
they needed.
like little hugs.
Yeah. You need a tap on the back to say, like, hey, good job. Like, just to know that I'm present and in your life. Like, so I definitely tried to treat them as individuals. And I will say that one time, nothing that I did worked with those kids. It was really, really sour. Like, I had never had such a bad experience. They just decided that they hated me, teamed up together to hate me. And it was bad. I also think it ended up taking other kids in the class, like, to tell them, like, you're messing with our class time because you just keep interrupting and fighting the teacher.
Interrupting.
You know, it was
Yeah.
bad. Okay, the last question. This is a doozy because it goes to both of us, a decision we both made.
Yeah.
So someone wrote in and said, I know it's already midsummer, but I'm really dreading going back to school next year. I have lost all joy in teaching. I love my students and I'm always excited to meet a new class, but I think the state of education has really gotten me down. I'm considering leaving the classroom, but I feel really guilty about letting my school down. Any advice?
Leave the classroom. I'm looking out for you as a teacher right now. I mean, don't you can't an unhealed person, an unsatisfied person will manifest trauma onto your classroom, right? There's gonna be resentment, and resentment, oh my God, it's tied to so many different emotions that
Yeah.
you need to unpack on the daily. And if it's resentment, it sounds like resentment. If you go back in, if you go back with resentment, that's going to manifest in so many ugly ways, harmful ways with students that you might as well quit now and find your and dreamscape and heal yourself. It looks like you got to go through some healing, and that's okay because there's always someone. They'll find someone. Hopefully, crossing fingers, they'll find a way. But that's also not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to yourself. Your locus of control is with yourself, and you heal yourself first, because, one day I might go back to the classroom, I might go back to my youth spoken word youth group, but I needed some time away from that, and I'm like now finding a little bit more open space, more I feel more liberated and healed from all the anxiety that I had in the classroom to go back and work with youth in a different way. You might work with your youth in a different fashion too. So I always say, if you're already leaning towards that way, lean into that before it gets worse, because you don't want to quit in the middle of the year. Because I had, as a coach, teachers quit in the middle of the year, and that's more damage on the school and the students than it is now. Because right now, there's technically and logistically, your principal can hire someone. It's July. Your school probably doesn't start until end of August, early September. So you got time, fam. So do what you got to do to take your time off if you can, and if you don't feel like you have the capacity, if you still feel you're torn, I would be transparent. Speak to your principal, see what they say. They're going to try and keep you. Or I've heard some principals who are like negotiating, do you want to teach part-time in some ways, in some forms, while I find someone else, just so we can still leverage your expertise on an online platform, because the future of school is hybrid. We know this, so there may be a middle ground. And if there isn't a middle ground, at least you did your due diligence to find out. And then you can start feeling less stressed about abandoning, quote unquote, your school because you did your due diligence. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think that I feel very, very, very similar. I wish in a perfect, beautiful world, the field of education and the job of being a teacher was well respected, was paid well compensated. I wish that schools had the proper funding. The way that classrooms are set up and the expectations now, there should be 2 to 3 adults in that room, right? Splitting all of the responsibilities. Like
100%.
there's so many responsibilities. In that perfect world, my answer might be different, but because of the current state of education, you do have to take care of yourself.
I'm glad you added that caveat, because I did not add that caveat, but that's exactly the caveat that informs how I answered. Okay, so thank you for saying that. Yeah,
no, I know that you feel the same exact way. And I was speaking to another teacher friend recently, and the way I framed it, it's like it's a horrible reference, but from Sex and the City, Samantha Jones, when she's dating that guy, she leaves him and she tells him, I love you, but I love me more. And that's how I felt about education. Like, I love education. I love the classroom. I am definitely missing out on those personal experiences, or not yet, like personal connections with students in the same way. Even with my after school matters classes, you just don't spend as much time together, so you don't have the same type of relationship. But I love myself more, and I need to have a day-to-day that makes me, I need to wake up happy. I need to spend my days with joy for most of the time. Obviously there's, nothing is perfect, but I need to spend it doing things that I love. And you can still impact education from outside of the classroom. There is so much in this field that I didn't know until I left. And now I can use my voice in a way to speak up about the field that I didn't feel as confident and comfortable doing when I was in the classroom. Like now I can talk about the conditions in a way that will hopefully push things forward. And I wish that more folks felt that same comfort. Now, at the same time, you do have to be smart about like your bills, gotta have a plan B.
Yeah,
You
100%.
know, what's health insurance, because I didn't have health insurance when I first quit, and that was very, very scary.
Hmm.
You know, so all of that is stuff to think about. But you know, I definitely agree with you. You have to take care of yourself, and you can actually be doing more damage if you're in the classroom and you're disconnected.
Yep,
Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
Okay. Well, that's all I have for today, Tony.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for coming. Is there anything
Oh,
else you want to
wow.
share with our listeners?
Wow, that was such a in-depth conversation about, and it's such a fun journey. We had a game with some Q&A. We talked about the book, which I am so grateful to have an opportunity earlier on to kind of prep educators, if educators are listening to this, about something so critical and so passionate to me right now. And that's it. Like, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, and stay tuned, because we'll probably do another round of this at some point after
Yeah,
the book. So that's it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for listening to It's All Trash, a podcast diving into the trash world of education. My name is Sabrina Alicea, and you can follow me at Es La Maestra on all socials. Our podcast is It's All Trash Pod on Twitter. Today we were joined by author and Ph.D. student Tony DelaRosa. You can find him on all socials at Tony Rosa Speaks. Be on the lookout for his book, Teaching the Invisible Race, coming out in September of 2023. Help support the podcast by subscribing to our Patreon. You can get yourself a nice little It's All Trash pin and even a shout out on the podcast. See you next time. Good?